A narcissist doesn't fear losing you, they fear being truly seen by you. From the very beginning, your empathy intoxicates them. It's like a warm light shining into the darkest corners of their soul. You understand them in a way no one else ever has. You don't just see the charming, confident, or powerful image they try to project. You sense the loneliness, the wounds, and the cracks hiding behind that calm smile. In those first moments, they feel loved, touched, and truly seen. For a brief instant, they believe they've finally found a safe place to rest. But that feeling quickly turns into fear, because for them, being seen means being exposed. And exposure means losing the only thing that keeps them alive: control. A narcissist cannot stand the feeling of losing power. They survive by controlling how others perceive them, what others think, feel, and how they react to them. Control gives them a sense of importance. But you're different. You can't be easily manipulated. You see through the perfect mask and glimpse the fragile, fearful, wounded human beneath it. That's what destroys them from within. The same heart that once made them feel safe becomes a mirror they can't bear to face. The love that once made them feel special now exposes everything they've tried to hide. And so, they begin to change. At first, it's subtle. Moments of silence, distant looks, words that make you question yourself. Then it grows into criticism, twisted stories, blame and manipulation designed to make you believe that you're the problem. But the truth is, you did nothing wrong. You simply stopped reflecting the illusion they needed to maintain their fragile ego. And when that mirror stopped reflecting, their entire world began to shake. That's why they push you away, not because they stopped loving you, but because that love made them lose control. They fear genuine affection they can't dominate. They fear the gaze that pierces through every disguise. They fear that you might see the truth, that beneath all their pride lies a terrified, empty soul. Once they're truly seen, they can no longer pretend. The mask begins to crack. The stories they crafted to manipulate others lose their power. They're forced to confront themselves, the emptiness they've spent their whole lives running from. And then, the silence begins. Not the silence of indifference, but the silence of understanding. You no longer argue, no longer try to prove anything. You choose peace. You step out of the cycle where your emotions were used as their tool. But to them, that silence is a collapse. It strips them of their final power, the power to control your reactions. Because in silence, there's no one left to mirror the image they want to believe in. No one left to define them. If you've ever wondered why they push away the one who truly cares, the answer is simple. Your love took away their illusion of control. You didn't destroy them with anger, you destroyed them with truth. And that truth, combined with your silence, is something they can't bear. When love fades and silence takes over, their ego begins to fracture. Not because you left, but because they no longer control your emotions. And that is what they fear the most. Because in the end, silence is what shatters the illusion of power they depend on. And from there, the real story begins. The story of illusion, control, and why they had to push away the only person who ever truly saw them. A narcissist lives inside a world built entirely on the illusion of control. Everything in their life must remain within their grasp, especially other people's emotions. They define themselves not by truth, but by how others react to them. When they can make you laugh, cry, feel confused or hurt, they feel powerful. But when you stay calm, silent and unresponsive, they feel as if they're disappearing. To them, love isn't a connection between two souls. It's a sophisticated power game. They don't love to bond. They love to control. They want to be loved in a way they can manipulate. They want you to need them, depend on them, and ultimately fear losing them. Once you're trapped in that cycle, they feel safe because you become an extension of their ego, a tool that sustains their illusion of being special, important, and worthy of love. But when you love them with pure sincerity, everything begins to fall apart. Real love terrifies them because it can't be controlled. It doesn't come with conditions, doesn't follow their script, and doesn't fear loss or react as expected. True love is a mirror, one that forces them to see themselves clearly, and that's exactly what makes them lose control. This fear doesn't come from you, it comes from the depths within them, where their insecurities, shame, and loneliness hide. Your love exposes them. It pulls their buried weaknesses to the surface. They begin to feel small, vulnerable, and unable to steer the relationship the way they used to. So they do what they've always done. They fight to regain power. They'll create distance, test you with coldness or silence. They'll provoke you, hoping you'll react with anger, fear, or desperation, because the moment you react, they feel in control again. In their mind, love is a battlefield, and the one who controls the emotions wins. That's why they always end up pushing away the person who truly cares, before they can be completely seen. The irony is painful. They say they crave love, but when real love appears, they feel suffocated. They say they long for trust, but when you give it, they panic. They say they want to be understood, but when you truly see who they are, they turn away, because for them, love and control are inseparable. Once love escapes their control, they feel like they're dying inside. So they don't leave because the love is gone. They leave because they're terrified of losing their power. They push away the only person who ever touched their real self, just to preserve the illusion that they're still in control. Yet deep down, they know they've just lost the only genuine thing they ever had, unconditional love. And when you stay silent, not reacting, not arguing, that illusion completely collapses. At that moment, they don't just lose you, they lose the mirror that reflected their existence. No one left to blame, no one left to manipulate, no audience for the role they've been playing their whole life. They're left standing alone in the emptiness of their own making, and that's what terrifies them the most. And it's here that the power begins to shift, because when you step out of their game, hold your peace and remain silent, you reclaim what was once stolen from you, your emotional sovereignty. Meanwhile, for the first time in their life, they're forced to face the truth. Their power only existed as long as you kept reacting, and now, as you no longer do, every illusion of control disintegrates. That's when they finally experience the true power of silence, something they can neither manipulate nor conquer. Silence is never empty. It carries weight, power, and the ability to shake everything built on deception. When you fall silent, you're no longer a character in the narcissist's play. You step off the stage, leaving them alone with the mask they once believed was their true face. At first, they don't understand what's happening. They're used to your reactions, your sadness, your tears, the long messages you wrote trying to explain, fix things, or be understood. When all of that disappears, they're surrounded by an unfamiliar void, a silence with no dialogue, no one to project their anger onto, no one to blame. And within that emptiness, they begin to hear what they've always avoided, the echo of themselves. They start to hear their own loneliness, their emptiness, their fear of being forgotten. Without your reflection, they no longer know who they are, because their identity was never built on truth, only on how others responded to them. Now, with no one left to mirror them, their ego begins to crack. That's the moment they experience what's called ego collapse. They lose control, and with it the illusion of self. The lies they believed, the images they crafted of being the perfect one, the victim, the winner, all begin to melt away. They no longer know what they're defending, because there's no one left to believe it anymore. As the silence continues, they cycle through chaos, panic, rage, denial, and finally, emptiness. They might try to reach out, provoke you, apologize half-heartedly, or pretend to regret everything, but not because they've changed. They're just trying to restore their sense of control. They need you to react, even if it's with anger or pity, because your reaction confirms that they still exist in your world. But when you remain silent, not out of hatred, but out of understanding, every tactic fails. They crash into the invisible wall of your peace, where all manipulation dissolves. And that's when the truth begins to take over, and the truth hurts, not because you're punishing them, but because they can't bear to face themselves. Your silence becomes the final mirror. It doesn't speak, it doesn't explain, it doesn't justify. It simply stands there, like an unspoken space that forces them to see everything. In that reflection, they finally face what they've always feared, that they have never truly been loved. Because they have never truly known how to love, not even themselves. For a narcissist, this is the most painful moment, not because you left, but because you went silent. That silence is a pure mirror, no lie can blur. It strips them not only of their power, but of the illusion that sustains them, the belief that they can control everything. And when that illusion shatters, they begin to crumble from within. They might act arrogant, pretend to be fine, or rush to find a new supply to fill the void. But the truth is, nothing can replace the silence you left behind. Because your silence isn't just distance, it's a boundary, a line between illusion and reality, manipulation and freedom, ego and soul. And you, within that silence, begin to change. You're no longer drawn into their game. You no longer feel the need to explain or prove your worth. You start to listen to yourself, something you lost long ago in the noise of pain. And there, in that stillness, something miraculous happens. You realize that your silence isn't punishment, it's healing. It doesn't come from anger, but from awakening. Because when you're silent, you no longer reflect their pain, you reflect your light. That's the moment true power shifts. It's no longer in their hands, but within the calm of your own peace. No longer part of their control, but part of your soul's freedom. And when they see it, when they realize they can no longer manipulate you, that you're still alive, radiant, and at peace, that's when your silence finally shatters their ego. When control disappears, the narcissist's ego begins to crack. They've spent their entire life constructing a flawless image, an ideal version of themselves, strong, admirable, loved, and never wrong. But when no one believes that story anymore, the mask starts to fall. At first comes denial. They convince themselves they're fine, that you're weak, that you'll come back. They tell others they're the victim, that you were the cruel one. They retell the old story in ways that preserve their noble image in front of others. But the more they talk, the emptier they feel, because deep down they know this time no one believes it, not even themselves. Then comes the anger. They're angry that you no longer react, angry that your silence has become an unbreakable wall, angry that all their familiar tactics, blame, sarcasm, begging, even tears, no longer work. That anger isn't truly directed at you, it's aimed at themselves, for losing the one person who truly saw them. But their ego is too fragile to admit that truth. So it turns into a storm of denial, resentment, and buried shame. As the anger fades, they begin to fall into an ego void. With no one left to reflect them, they become like a person without a reflection in the mirror. Everything feels meaningless. Joy fades. Work feels heavy. New relationships are shallow distractions. They search for another supply, someone to admire them, to fill the emptiness. But no one can replace you, because with you, everything was real. And that's what torments them. They can't face the truth that they destroyed the only thing that ever made them feel alive. They can't stand to see you calm, moving forward, smiling, while they're drowning in chaos. Inside them, a small voice begins to whisper, weak but impossible to silence. If it's not their fault, then whose is it? That's the moment when the ego truly collapses. With no one left to blame, they are forced to face themselves. But for a narcissist, this isn't an awakening, it's a breakdown, because they don't know how to exist alone with themselves. The silence that brings you peace, for them, it's hell. In the stillness, they hear the echoes of everything they've run from: shame, loneliness, regret they can't even name. Some will try to escape again, with new relationships, with work, with another round of blame. But nothing erases the truth. They are no longer the center of anyone's world. They no longer hold the power to define someone else's worth. And for the first time, they experience true powerlessness, the collapse of the ego they once worshipped. And you, watching from afar, don't feel triumph, you feel understanding. You know that the greatest punishment doesn't come from hatred, it comes from truth. And this truth is too heavy for them to bear. While they spiral into emptiness, you find yourself again in stillness. You no longer need them to define your value. You no longer need to react to prove your worth. Your silence has become the most powerful statement, one they can neither control nor forget. The collapse of the ego isn't just the end of their power, it's the beginning of truth. When the mask falls, all that remains is the human part they buried, fragile, scared, wounded, but also the only place from which healing could ever begin. But most narcissists never reach that point. They choose to live on with a new mask, a new story, a new victim, because facing the truth requires a courage they don't have. And so the cycle repeats: love, control, destruction, escape. But for you, the story is no longer about them. When their ego collapses, you are no longer trapped in their game. Your silence has closed the circle of pain and opened a new space, where peace is no longer a luxury, but your natural state. And as you walk away, without anger, without fear, you finally understand. They didn't collapse because of you. They collapsed because of themselves, because they cannot live authentically. And in that moment, when you no longer need revenge, validation, or victory, only peace, that's when you've truly won. After everything, your silence is no longer an emptiness. It becomes a space for rebirth. In that stillness, you begin to hear a voice that had long been drowned out by the noise of pain, arguments, manipulation, and confusion. It is your own voice, gentle, honest, and peaceful. You realize that silence is not weakness but strength, because it takes a truly powerful heart to stay calm, to not react, to resist being pulled into someone else's emotional storm. You no longer need to prove, defend, or explain yourself. You simply choose peace over chaos, truth over illusion, and freedom over fear. When you stop fighting to be understood, you finally begin to understand yourself. When you stop chasing false love, you start feeling the pure love that flows from within. You come to see that real love isn't about saving someone, it's about being with them without losing yourself. And sometimes, real love isn't about staying, it's about knowing when to walk away. Through this journey, you begin to see clearly what once hurt you, not to resent it, but to learn from it, so you never repeat it. You understand that the narcissist was never strong, but a soul trapped in deep fear, and even though they caused you pain, they also unintentionally awakened you, forcing you to confront your limits, your self-respect, and your true worth. From the ruins, you start rebuilding yourself, slowly, peacefully, without desperation. Each day, you reclaim small pieces of serenity. A morning without anxiety, a night of restful sleep, a genuine smile in the mirror. You realize that your silence was never meant to punish anyone, it was meant to protect your inner peace. And one day you look back and see it clearly. The pain that once broke you was actually the doorway to your freedom. The silence that once made you feel lonely became the teacher that taught you to listen to your soul. And the love that was once taken for granted became the lesson that revealed the unconditional value of your heart. The narcissist may never understand you, but that no longer matters. Because you understand yourself, you've learned that forgiveness isn't about excusing their behavior. It's about freeing yourself from the energy of the past. You no longer need to win over them, because finding peace is already your victory. Now, as you walk in silence, no longer led by pain, you radiate a different kind of power, the strength of someone who has looked into the darkness and still chosen the light. You no longer seek love to fill an emptiness, but to share your wholeness. You no longer fear solitude, because you've become the safest home for your own soul. The silence you once feared has become your sanctuary. In that stillness, you are no longer the victim. You are the awakened one, no longer the wounded, but the one who has learned the true meaning of freedom. And when you look back, seeing everything as it really was, without anger, without regret, you understand that it was your silence that healed you. It didn't just shatter their ego, it awakened your authentic self. Because in the end, silence was never the end, it was your rebirth. If you've ever loved someone like that, someone who made you doubt yourself, who made you believe that real love must come with pain, know this: you were never wronged for loving. You simply loved someone who wasn't mature enough to receive that kind of love. Don't regret your kindness. Don't be ashamed of your trust. Your compassion was never a weakness, it was a gift. You just gave it to someone who didn't know how to cherish it. And yet, through the pain they caused you, they unknowingly awakened something far greater within you, the freedom of your soul. Now, you no longer need to prove anything. You don't need an apology. You don't need validation. All you need is the peace you found within yourself. Because when you chose silence, you chose yourself. When you stopped reacting, you reclaimed your power. And when you forgave, not for them, but for yourself, that's when you truly broke free. And if tonight you're listening to these words in a quiet room, know this: the stillness you feel right now is the beginning of a new chapter. You are no longer who you used to be. You are someone who has walked through darkness and still chosen the light. Now your silence is no longer a wound, it's a pair of wings. So fly with a heart unburdened, because you've learned something they never could. But true love never confines, it sets you free.